Thank you all for your practice.
Okay, so the title of tonight's talk is Right Livelihood Amidst Late-Stage Capitalism. And I wrote this talk because I'm not sure that anyone's noticed, but life is getting increasingly more difficult day by day. It's getting harder to navigate, and even surviving in the world is becoming more challenging. And I feel like this is because the effects of late-stage capitalism are having a negative effect on most people that don't fall into a very small income bracket. And I am definitely one of those people. Are any of you one of those people? So the cost of living has increased dramatically over the last few years, and most people's wages have not risen to match that. The financial demand that we have is surpassing our means for survival in a lot of cases, even in the most subtle ways. Corporate profits and inflation are at an all-time high, and it's not hard to see the correlation between those two, right? Like everything's getting more expensive, and the corporations are all bringing in record profits. Joseph Goldstein notes that the world we live in, particularly in late-stage capitalism, poses many challenges for those seeking to live according to ethical values. And I don't think I could have really stated it any better than that. You can always count on Joseph Goldstein to drop some little nuggets of gold. So I feel like right livelihood is a topic that a lot of Dharma teachers don't want to talk about very often. And that's because it really asks us to put the magnifying glass on ourselves, more so than we already do in this practice. But, it asks us to put a magnifying glass on the way that we earn a living and ask ourselves whether our means of survival is in line with our ethics. Which, like I said, that's not always the easiest thing to do, but I really feel like it's necessary. So tonight, I'd like to talk about right livelihood and what it is and the challenges that we face in finding work that aligns with our values. I'd also like to explore the psychological implications of guilt and shame that arise from navigating these challenges. And I'd like to talk about the difference between happiness and fulfillment. So right livelihood is a pretty important part of the Buddha's Eightfold Path. The Eightfold Path is a path of 8 limbs split into 3 sections. These are Sila, Samadhi, and Panya. Sila is the ethical part of the path, and that's where we would find right livelihood. And first and foremost, right livelihood is a way in which we can earn a living without compromising the precepts. So what are the precepts? Well, the first precept is to do no harm to any living being. The second precept is to not take what is not freely given. The third is to not use any false, slanderous, or harsh speech. The fourth is to be wise and careful with our sexual conduct. And the fifth is to not take any intoxicating substances that lead to heedlessness. Which sounds pretty easy, right? So how does this relate to right livelihood and the work that we do? So rather than pointing to what type of work we do, right livelihood is more pointing to the types of work that we should avoid. And the Buddha was really specific about the types of work that we should avoid. In the Vanija Sutta, the Buddha states, "And what is right livelihood?" He says, "This is the avoidance of wrong livelihood, which is dealing in weapons, living beings, meat, intoxicants, and poisons." And I think the Buddha uses this to highlight the importance of ethical behavior in all aspects of our life, including our work. And it reminds us that our actions have consequences and that we should strive to minimize harm to others and ourselves. And the Buddha recognized that work has ethical implications. That we should choose work that benefits not only ourselves, but also benefits society as a whole and the greater good. In the Sutta Nipada, he said, "One is not called noble who harms living beings. By not harming living beings, one is called noble." So if we want to be ethical, and we want to be noble people, we have to take a close look at ourselves and our livelihood, what we do for a living. And this is where we have to start asking questions, whether our work is ethical, whether it falls in line with the precepts, whether it benefits ourselves as well as society. As I said earlier, we really have to turn the magnifying glass on ourselves and our jobs and ask, does this harm living beings? Does this harm the environment? And if we look at our work at face value, it may not seem to cause harm, but if we go down the supply chain far enough, likely you're going to find that our jobs, some small way, shape, or form, all have ethical implications. And there's some harm involved. You might not think that what you do for a living has any environmental implications, but have you really looked into it? You might just say you work in retail and you fold pants at Banana Republic, right? Face value, nothing too major about that. Seems pretty safe. You just fold pants, right? What could be so harmful about that? Face value, nothing against our ethics there. But if you look into it further, you'll find that the garment industry is actually the second highest polluter, just behind the oil industry. Then does that harm living beings? Yeah, for sure. Does it harm the environment? Definitely. And in a lot of cases, the garment industry has some pretty lax child labor laws in a lot of countries where garments are made. You work for Apple, you work for Tesla. Well, all of the batteries involved in the production of those products, the cell phones and the electric cars, they all require cobalt. 70% of which comes from the Congo, where the working conditions are absolutely abysmal. Have any of you seen any of the footage from the Congo and the cobalt mines? Yes. Yeah, it's terrible. It's truly awful. It's hell on earth. Quite literally hell on earth. The cobalt is toxic, and there are adults and children mining it with no protective wear at all. There's no protection. A lot of the time they're wearing flip-flops, and they're digging for it by hand. And that sucks. It's a shitty thing to know that just having a cell phone, like I am somewhat implicit in those abysmal conditions. And it's kind of unavoidable, even if you're a vegan working in a vegan restaurant, you have to come to terms with the fact that even vegetables, for all intents and purposes, a lot of beings died so you could get your vegetables. Whether they're, small animals, insects, something's going to die so that we can exist. And when our work causes harm to others or the environment, this can create a lot of shame. It can create a lot of guilt. I feel a lot of guilt over it, just knowing the implications of my actions and just my existence has a negative impact on this planet and on living beings that is out of my control. In the Pali Canon, guilt and shame are called Hiri and Ottappa. And they're known as the guardians of the world. And that's because they can influence us to make wiser decisions. If we feel guilt and we feel shame, oftentimes that can be the catalyst that we need to make some changes in our lives. But they can also be harmful to our mental health and our well-being. It's when we judge ourselves too harshly for our choices, we can feel guilt, we can feel shame. And it's getting harder and harder to make ethical decisions in the vapid corporate landscape in which we find ourselves in. So what do? Well, we do the best that we can, and we be gentle with ourselves, knowing that a lot of this is out of our hands and out of our control. We control what we can, but the rest of it it's not up to us. In the Anguttara Nikaya, the Buddha said, one who does not have compassion for oneself cannot develop compassion for others. And so when we do make mistakes and we do compromise our values, we can acknowledge our imperfections and strive to do better without judging ourselves too harshly. Late-stage capitalism can make it difficult to find work that aligns with our ethics. Again, Joseph Goldstein says that many people are faced with the challenge of finding work that aligns with their values and that contributes to the greater good. Modern society is very complex. There's a myriad, really, of interconnected systems and structures, and finding work that aligns with our values in such a complex system can be challenging. And that's certainly the case for me. As I progress with this path and with this practice, I've had to make a lot of tough decisions about my livelihood. I've turned down a handful of jobs that would have benefited me financially, but that I couldn't come to terms with, ethically. And so now, I find myself struggling to find work and at times barely able to pay my bills. As a lot of you know, I'm a convicted felon, so I have my arrest record as an obstacle. And trying to get gainful employment as a Buddhist convicted felon in the Bible Belt South is particularly tricky. And as I said, I always, even when I do find a job, I always have to take into account the ethics of the job. So even when I'm offered a job, I have to weigh them against my ethics every time. And a lot of times, all the time, my ethics win, without question. Like I was saying, right now I'm pretty broke. And because of that, this can cause me to fall into some old patterns of beating myself up for the decisions of the past that I have absolutely no control over right now. These things of my past that make it harder for me to get a job now. But really, I'm thankful for this path because in those times, I get to turn towards that pain rather than run away from it by using drugs or using alcohol or anything else that would dull my experience. So rather than push away from it, I turn towards the pain. I turn towards the pain of the financial instability. I turn towards the guilt of my past. And I'm able to offer myself some compassion. I can't change the past. All I can do is focus on the present moment and have faith that things will be okay and something will work out. And to this point, I've always managed to work it out. The Buddha said, just as a bird with broken wings cannot fly, one who does not have compassion cannot be called a human being. And I think the Buddha highlights the importance of compassion in our daily lives, including our work, with that quote. When we struggle to find ethical work, we can practice compassion towards ourselves and others, just recognizing that we're all a part of a horribly broken system. As I said earlier, it can be challenging to make ethical choices in a system that prioritizes profit over people. When we compromise our values, we may experience those feelings of guilt and shame. Again, I've had to make some tough decisions when it comes to my livelihood. I live over off of 9th Avenue, and I got offered this job at a cigar store right there on 9th Avenue. And it paid okay. It was, not great. I think it was like $15 or $16 an hour, and I got offered the job. And it would have been really convenient for me because it was like basically right across the street from where I live. I literally could have walked to work in less than a minute. But I turned it down because I can't ethically sell people something that I know will kill them. I used to bartend. I got offered a job at a bar, bartending. I had to turn it down because ethically, I can't take a job that I know affects people negatively. I can't. I just can't. It would keep me up at night. I used to not have a problem with that. No big deal. But as I, move forward with this path and I really dedicated myself to it, my ethics win every time. Every single time. So I couldn't take those jobs, There was just too much negative karma attached to both of them for me to even consider them as an option. Again, the Buddha said, one who destroys life, utters lies, takes what is not given, goes to others' wives, and is addicted to intoxicating drinks, such a person digs up one's own roots even to protect one's family. And again, he's pointing out that we must take responsibility for our actions and make ethical choices, even when they're not the easiest ones to make. Because we're going to face pressure to compromise our values. Every day, we're going to come up against obstacles that are going to test our ethics and our values on this path. But we have to remember that all of our actions have consequences. By investigating our lives and our work, we can begin to see things as they are, as they truly are. And then we can begin to wake up. And he also said we should also surround ourselves with Kalyanamita, our spiritual friends, and people like you find in this room. And try to cultivate these positive relationships, with people who support us in our efforts to live according to our values. We also have to take responsibility for our actions and the impact they have on others, recognizing that we are all connected. So we should be mindful of our actions and the impact they have on others. And we should be aware of the complex system in which we live and work to find opportunities to create positive change and hopefully some sense of fulfillment. And so in our pursuit of right livelihood, it's important to distinguish between happiness and fulfillment. Happiness is a temporary emotion. It arises from external circumstance, whereas fulfillment is a deeper sense of satisfaction that arises from doing meaningful work aligned with our values. Happiness is an entirely transitory state. With moments, it comes with moments of joy brought about by activities that ignite like the oldest part of our dopamine reward system. Things like sex, gambling, eating sugary foods, drugs, alcohol, coming into money unexpectedly, things like that, all set this dopamine system off. Things where we gain something, and it's very transactional in that sense. When we gain something and feel good due to this hit of dopamine that floods the system. But that doesn't last very long, does it? It's like, you go and buy the new thing, and even on the car ride home, it kind of loses its luster. Even by the time you get it home, the excitement is over. Fulfillment, on the other hand, is much longer lasting. That comes from regularly engaging in what are called pro-tribal activities. Helping and caring for other people. So while happiness comes from essentially receiving, fulfillment, in a sense, comes from giving. And fulfillment is interesting in the fact that whereas happiness works on the dopamine reward system, fulfillment actually works on the serotonin system. So it's much longer lasting. Serotonin sticks around for a while, whereas dopamine's kind of in and out. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 useless words is one useful word, hearing which one attains peace." And I think that really highlights the value of meaningful work and the sense of inner peace that it can bring. And there are numerous psychological and physiological benefits of engaging in fulfilling work. When we engage in work that feels meaningful, we experience a sense of purpose and fulfillment that can improve our mental health, increase our motivation, and can even boost the immune system. But we have to be honest with ourselves about what we truly value and seek out work that aligns with our values. And so right livelihood isn't just about finding work that pays the bills, but it's about finding work that aligns with our values and brings us a sense of fulfillment. And the difference between happiness and fulfillment is pretty significant. And so we have to cultivate self-awareness to make sure that we're seeking fulfillment and not just feeding our impulses. And through aligning our work with our values, we can experience the psychological and the physiological benefits of fulfilling work, while also contributing to the greater good and society as a whole. And so I talked a little bit about what right livelihood is, and how when we're not aligned with our ethics, we suffer. I've also touched a little bit on the difference between happiness and fulfillment. So I hope that something in this talk has resonated with you, and I encourage you to investigate your own livelihood with a stronger lens.